Okay. All right, so we're here to talk about panels using the Omega4 theme and using panels and how they can be used together. And as I said before the recording started, I come from a background of really disliking panels, and I'm going to tell you why before I get going. The primary reason why I really hate panels is because a number of the first Drupal sites that I needed to support that I didn't build were built with panels, and the client needed a certain amount of access to the site and ability to edit the site. And so the sites were built in such a way that the client actually had the ability to edit the panels. And what I discovered very quickly in all of those projects that I was working on is that the client managed invariably to completely hose their site in ways that were very difficult for me to figure out because it was something that they did in a panel and I didn't even know which panel it was in or what was removed or why or how, and it was incredibly messy. So for that reason, and because to this day I continue, my primary role continues to be to support clients who have questions or to help them learn how to use their Drupal sites. Panels are one of those things that whenever I realize a site is using them, I get very unhappy because it becomes a very challenging thing to work with in regards to the client being able to actually make good use of their site. So when I build sites, I tend to, for the things that you would typically use panels for, I tend to use context, which isn't perfect, but it tends to be a little bit less volatile when the client might get in there and take a look, because context looks scary enough to clients that they don't touch it. Panels, especially now with Drupal 8 on the horizon and with Panoply out there, panels are starting to look prettier and prettier, and the client isn't, unfortunately, appropriately scared when they look at panels, and so they're not appropriately careful. But with context, they are. So, so for that reason pretty much alone, when I need something that you would normally use panels for, I tend to use context. However, I recently had two projects that we worked on with Cherry Hill in which Panoply came up as a potential solution for those clients. And Panoply it's an install profile that really starts you out using panels, and it uses a lot of the kind of Drupal 8, I'm still in Firefox here, Firefox is where I'm not logged in. It uses a lot of the kind of look and feel that we're going towards with Drupal 8. So let me head over to a panel page in a site that we're using Panoply on. So let's just go to this one. And so this is a actually, I think if we go here.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but what was the name of the distribution?
Panoply. And actually, let me Drupal.org project Panoply, like Monopoly, but which is such an appropriate name for something having to do with panels. Panoply, Panoply. So, all right. So actually, let me show you this on something that I haven't butchered quite as much yet. Okay, so if I go to a node that has a panel on it, that has a panel controlling how it looks, I get this little button down here. Hopefully you can see that. I'll make this bigger so that you can see it. So I get this little button down here that says change this layout or customize this page. And these are actually buttons to modify the panel. Now this goes back to what I was saying earlier on, where the client looks at panels and thinks that they can do stuff with them, and that's bad. That's really, really bad. So if they have a certain level of permissions that give them the ability to do that. Panels can still be, even as they're getting more interesting and having good use cases, they can still be incredibly dangerous with the right kind of client, which is the majority of the types of clients that we work with Cherry Hill. So, I just click on this, and now I can drag and drop stuff around. Let me make this smaller again so that you can actually see this. I can just drag and drop stuff to different places. Imagine what horrible, horrible things I could do to a site as a client, not knowing what I'm doing in here. And it looks user-friendly. Yes, permissions are definitely, oh, it does rhyme with monopoly. Permissions, Tony is asking, what about permissions and panels? And yes, you can restrict the permissions that somebody has to work with panels. And that again goes back to what I said, if it's the right kind of client and the right kind of project. With Cherry Hill, we work with a lot of libraries. We build sites that we then train the client to use, and they're very limited budgets, so they really take on the responsibility to learn how to manage their site at a very deep level, which means that we can't necessarily always restrict them to not be able to manage their panels. So it does become a very dangerous, or if we were going to put panels, we don't put panels on library sites for this reason, because they need full access to really do pretty much anything to their site, and they don't know enough to work with panels, so it's a very risky. They can get into a lot of trouble, and this is something that I learned very early on. So it has to be the right kind of client, the kind of client that you can restrict, that you know will come back to you or a knowledgeable site builder to do future work with their site. The other thing that I learned about panels pretty much every time I've worked with somebody else's panels configuration is that everybody takes a different approach to how they're going to set up their panels. So it's really difficult when you're working with a panel site to inherit something from someone else, because the mindset that goes into setting it up is different from the mindset of the last person or from your own mindset. So that's something to be aware of as well. It definitely takes some time to get an idea of why they configured their panels the way that they did. However, now we're getting into this interesting time where there is something like Panoply. I'll say Panoply instead of Panoply, since it is supposed to rhyme with Monopoly. This install profile, again, it's trying to kind of go the direction that Drupal 8 is going, so a lot of this stuff is what we need to become familiar with. And it does make it very easy. This is pretty much a vanilla Panoply install. I haven't really changed anything. The only thing I've done is I've added the Omega theme, which is currently disabled. And otherwise it's vanilla, and then I just added a couple of nodes, and I added a content type to show some stuff here. So if I go to the content types, Panoply by default will only come with the content page content type. So I added the article content type because I want to show you setting up something. Why do I say that? Okay, so a question just came in on the questions. Why do I say that this is the way that Drupal 8 is going? There's a lot of effort to make the UI more user-friendly in Drupal 8, and panels, especially the kind of way that Panoply has integrated panels, is a big part of that. And making everything kind of drag and drop, drag your stuff from one place to another, see it in kind of real time as you can, what it looks like. All of this is happening. All of this is the direction that Drupal 8 is going, and a lot of this is demonstrated by what Panoply does with panels. So it is kind of one of those areas that a lot of people are thinking is the kind of next best practice. It's not necessarily going to be the next best practice, it's just something that people are thinking will be. Okay, so vanilla Panoply install. Let's head back over to one of those pages. So when you set up your content type, you can set up your content type to use panels or something called panelizer or not. And if you have that set up, then on any node that is that content type, so for example, this is a page, it'll have the Panelizer tab right there on it. You can actually start changing the layout right here. So if I click on Panelizer, it takes me to this somewhat unfriendly list, but this is really more for the site builders than it is for your client. Your client's the one who's hopefully not going to be dragging and dropping stuff around, but they probably will if they have that level of access. They're not likely to be in here though. So you'll see that this looks a lot like the display settings on your content type, where you have different the different displays settings that you have in your content type's display settings will be here. So you've got your default, you've got your full page, you've got your teaser, and then you've got them listed here, and then you have a bunch of operations for what you can do to actually work with what these look like. And I'll start showing you what some of those actually look like. So if we go to full page, let's just open this up in two tabs. So full page would be this display. So if we head over here and we look at layout, oops, I just clicked on the wrong layout. So let's make sure that I'm still in full page. Okay, I am. So if we go to layout, you'll see that there's the option, there's a bunch of kind of options for the layout that are already here. And these are built into Panoply. Panels itself has a bunch of layouts as well. It has a builder, and then it has these column layouts that you can choose from. So you can switch this and you can go to Panoply. Now once we enable, yes, it does come with, the question is, does it come with all those layouts? And yes, it does by default. Again, all of this is vanilla. I haven't done anything to it. It's just what it is. It comes with a bunch of layouts. Once we enable the Omega theme, there's actually going to be another category because Omega also uses layouts. It uses layouts. Omega is cool because it uses layouts, which is kind of a panels concept, but it uses them whether or not you're using panels. And David is asking, does this support responsive layouts? And yes, these are, I believe, I haven't tested them all, but all the ones I have tested are all responsive. And if there's one that's not responsive, then it probably will be in a next patch, because right at this time everything is going responsive. I have had issues with the default layouts that come with panels. They don't tend to be responsive, and they tend to be a little bit kind of frustrating to me to make use of. But again, that's I'm fairly new to panels because my background has been a little suspicious of whether or not they're good to use on a site. But all the Panoply ones that I've tested are responsive, and again, not that many of them. And then when you set up Omega ones, the Omega4 layouts, they're responsive, and any that you do on your own, you would probably make responsive. So if one of these layouts worked for you and was the perfect layout, then you could choose it. So if I go ahead and switch here, right now, if we go back to the view of this page, you'll see that I have a left sidebar here, and then I have the kind of content area here, very standard layout, which is this one, Bryant, and you can actually see it in the little screenshot here. And then if I want to choose, let's say, let's choose Harris here, because this will be a dramatic example. So I'm choosing one that's also a fairly standard display. It's got kind of a header area, and it has the 3-column thing going on. So I can choose that and then switch my layout to this. And then you'll see that I have this drag and drop interface where I can actually move stuff around into different areas. So, so I like that as an initial setup, so I'll go ahead and save that. Now it's going to take me out of the layout tab here. I was here on the layout tab. It's going to move me over to content. And this is where I can be very specific about what shows up where. So I can say, you know what, I want I don't want the menu in the header. That's very strange. So let's put the menu in the second column. And then I do want the image in the header. I want the body in the content area. And then these two, I'll just leave them as they are. So I can go ahead and save that. And I can also do a live preview on it right here, and it'll show me what this looks like. Obviously, this is not great. It looks very strange right now. But you can see how powerful this could be if I were actually making proper use of this. And then I can also, I want that little menu to go away. I can also check the responsivity of it and see what it does if I move stuff around and see if I like what it does. So I can take a look at that and I can say, okay, that's a little bit weird. I don't really want to do a lot to that image, so I'm going to move it over into first column. I can actually preview before I save, but for some reason that's my go-to. And then I can take a look and see how that looks there. The other thing, responsivity, hey, you know, that probably isn't a word, but it should be, at least for what we do. So this image, you'll notice that it's very small. This is something that comes out of Panoply and its defaults. It has some image styles that are half or quarter of the space that's available. And right now the display settings on this are to be half, and this is in the content type setup. The display settings are set to use half of what's available of the space. So that's why it's so small, and it is actually half of this. So you can go into the content of a particular element in a area, in a region, in your panels layout, and make adjustments. So I'm clicking on settings. Let me do that again in case that wasn't seen. There's this standard little gear that we're very familiar with, and then I'll choose the settings option here in this list. So the formatter for my image here is image. I could choose another formatter. This is a lot like what you'll get when you're setting up your display settings, but it's a little bit more detailed because it's specific to this panel. I can also, and by the way, this panel being the panel that affects all page content, because this is a page content panel, not a panel for this specific page. Or for this specific node. I hope that that's fairly clear. There's a crop option here. That crop option it's part of what Panoply offers, and it is specific to this particular panel that I'm making this crop here. So if I wanted to do that, I could. I'll go ahead and cancel that. What I really want to do, though, is I want to change the image style that's in use here, and then so I can't do that here, so I'm just going to kind of keep my fingers crossed and hope that when I click continue it lets me, and it does. So now I have the image style option here, and I can also set the linking options. Again, this is all stuff that you'll be familiar with from the display settings on your content type. So I'm going to choose full because I've now put it into a sidebar and I want it to take up the whole space. And sometimes this reloads real time, sometimes it doesn't. So we'll just ignore that it didn't right now. And I'll click finish. And then that was supposed to work. So we'll save that, and hopefully the preview shows us, yep, it did work. All right, so now the image is the size that I actually want it to be. And all of that, as you can see that as a developer or as a site builder, not as a developer necessarily, but as a site builder, this is an incredibly easy way to build your site really quickly and make it look exactly the way that you want it to look. So this can be really, really useful. But I'm sure that all of you, since you've all probably dealt with the same kind of situations with clients that you want to give access to stuff or need to give access to stuff, but they don't quite have the level of knowledge. They have just enough to be dangerous. You can see how incredibly risky this becomes. And so the question that Dennis is now asking is, what about from a maintenance standpoint? And that's where this gets really interesting. So there's the security updates, the standard Drupal maintenance, and this is really no more or less difficult to maintain than anything else. If you compare anything to the date module, this is easy to maintain from a security standpoint, update standpoint. But from the standpoint of you as the developer over years, maintaining these, if your panels aren't complex and you don't have a lot of them, then it's pretty easy to maintain. If you have a lot and they're very complex, then you as the individual will probably need as much documentation as somebody else inheriting your site who comes in to actually do work on it and needs to figure out how you set up panels, because they're not quite, they look so straightforward when you're building them, but they're not. A year later, you'll be, why did I set it up exactly this way? Why did I use this layout as opposed to this layout? You won't necessarily know, and then that can be confusing. One area where this is really great from a maintenance standpoint, and from where I kind of recently started to realize that panels could be an incredibly great solution on occasion, even for a site that I built, even though I spent all this time being so anti-panels, is when you need to enable and disable content on a regular basis. So I'm going to show you the site that I recently realized, wow, if only I had built this in panels, this would be so much easier. This is a site that I've maintained for years. I built it, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. This is an old site. This is a Drupal 6 site. It's an old site, and it was supposed to be maintained by the client, but the client's made up of volunteers who change on a regular basis and are very busy people, and they're not tech savvy, and so a lot of that maintenance has actually ended up coming back to me and now to Cherry Hill for very good reason. And one of the things that happens is this is an election site, so election content is active on the site at very specific times. I did not mean to click on that because I wanted to show you specifically the home page. At very specific times in the year, election content needs to be front and center. So vote with the league in current election. This is a view saying vote with the league vote with the league. Tell me the date of the current election being set by a flag, and then give me all of the ballot measures from that current election. And it's a block that's being displayed on the page. Now I have to remember every election, or they have to remember to tell me, but usually, again, this kind of falls on me just by the nature of the league as an organization. Every election I have to remember to go in and either remove, whether it's before the election or a certain period of time after the election, which is 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the election, to remove or add this block, physically remove or add this block into the page, which means hunting down the block and resetting its status. Again, this is Drupal 6, this isn't Drupal 7, so there's no block setting telling it what region to be in that gets to live with the block, even if it's even if it gets disabled. Drupal 7 is a lot nicer, a lot more kind of user-friendly for something like this, but still, even in Drupal 7, panels would probably be a better solution for this, because if I were using panels, then all I would have to do here, I wouldn't have to manually manhandle this block, for lack of a better word. I could just simply go to, let's find that panel that I was playing with here. Here it is. I could simply go into the panel, find the block, and then click on the gear and choose disable this pane. And then when I save that, that pane is still there. It hasn't been removed. All I've done is hidden it. So it won't show up. It'll stay there, it'll live there, it won't display for the user, it won't be rendered in code, in the source code, but I can then go back, 5 weeks later or 5 months later, I can go back and re-enable the pane by simply saying, oh, enable this pane, and that's all I have to do. So from a maintenance standpoint there, if you have stuff, if you have time-sensitive stuff, as is the case with, wrong demo site here, as is the case with this site, that's going to be on and off and on and off on a regular basis, that would be, panels would be a really good solution for that. The other thing is that I had to create incredibly comprehensive documentation. There's actually 2 sites here for this, one being where they talk about their stances and the other one being where they don't take a stance. They just talk about all of the aspects on both sides. So education fund versus their action standpoint. So this one has even more stuff on it that is very time sensitive, and I have to have this detailed cheat sheet telling me when to turn things on and off throughout the course of an election period. If I had used panels, then all I would have to do is enable and disable panes. I wouldn't have to go through this complex process. And then Cindy mentions here documentation is uber important, and yes, even if I had set this up with panels, documentation would still be important because well, first of all, because documentation is always important. You never know what you're going to forget. I don't know. I'm always amazed at what I forget about a site that I built. I come in, I'm like, why on earth did I do this? And there was probably a very good reason, but I no longer know what it was because I didn't write it down. So documentation, definitely most important thing you can do. The other reason why documentation is super important is because you may not always be the person working on that site. You might be about to have a baby and about to have to let a bunch of other people deal with everything that you built, and so that needs to be in consideration as well. Well, okay, Tony, maybe you won't be physically having a baby, but that's something to consider. It's something that's very real for me right now. So, all right, moving on. Thank you. So moving on to, this is why panels can be useful, and this is what's kind of interesting about how Panoply works, how panels can work, and how easy it can be. And I just wanted to show you very quickly here, the reason why I created 2 content types was so that I could show you how you would set up one that doesn't have the panel stuff enabled on it. So Palms and About a Bridge, these are 2-page content types. They follow the panels, the panel setup that was already created. But Boats in Boston is an article content type. Oh, I was playing around with stuff and I didn't disable something that I should have disabled. So let me disable this. You're not seeing what I'm doing. And then we'll backtrack here. Okay. Hopefully I let that save long enough before I closed it. Okay, so Boats in Boston doesn't have panels enabled on the content type. This, by the way, Cindy, this is D7, not D8. This is the Panoply install profile, which is trying to mimic D8 as much as it can. So that's why it might look a little bit like D8. It's backporting a lot of stuff. And one of the values of playing with Panoply now is that you can play with Drupal 7 but get kind of a little bit of a feel for some of the UI changes in Drupal 8. And so this Boats in Boston node, it's an article content type. Article content type doesn't currently have the panelizer stuff enabled for it, so I would have to, if I wanted to use panels on this, I would have to go through kind of a complex process with the panels interface. But Panoply and Panels also has Panelizer, which is a tool. And so I'm going to go into the content type, and I'm actually going to edit the content type here. And I'm going to tell it to use Panelizer. And I can actually tell it which which displays it's gonna use Panelizer for. I can actually say, you know what, for every node, I want to possibly choose a different panel. And in this case, yes, you don't need, so Dennis is asking, you need to enable panels per content type. And the answer to that question is no, you don't. But if you don't use Panelizer and enable in the content type, it's a little bit more difficult to set up the panel through the panels interface, because you're basically then setting up a context, not using the context module, but using context within panels to say, okay, when these certain things are true, then we're going to use this panel. So you don't necessarily need to do it through the content type, and whether or not you do is going to depend on the specifics of your situation and what you're trying to build. This is the really easy way to do it. And so just increasing the size here based on Doug's very apt comment. And all right, so allow panel choice. If checked, multiple panels can be created, and each entity will get a selector to choose which panel to use. So each article node could actually use a different panel as opposed to one panel for all, one panel to rule all article nodes. So that is an option as well. But we have this ability to turn on Panelizer in the content type itself. And then if I go over to this node, now I have the Panelizer tab right there, and I can start to actually modify how this looks. So in the teaser, for example, I can take a look and I can say, you know what, in this teaser, or actually let's not go to teaser, let's go to the full page on this, because I added some comments. So I'm going to make this smaller again just to show you what this can look like. So what I'm going to do is go to layout, and I'm going to select a layout that I want for the full page of the article content type. And I want to use a Panoply layout because they're all responsive. And what I actually think I want to use is, I'm just going to make this bigger again, and I'm actually going to choose, the default that we were using was Bryant initially. I'm going to use this one, Burr Flipped, right here. And the reason why I'm going to use this is because what I want to do is put the content on the left, and then I want to put the comments on the right. So Bryant, the kind of default one, that right sidebar is a bit more narrow. I want a little bit more space because I'm actually going to stick the comments over there. So we'll choose that and then save it, or continue. We're not really saving at this point. So now it's going to ask me, in this transition from one layout to another, what do I want to do with the existing stuff? And right now the existing stuff is only this kind of everything, all the panes. So that'll be edited later. But right now I just want to move it all into content. And a question was just asked by Doug. He's assuming that I've disabled blocks for all of these pages. And since this is a default install, just a very basic install, there's really no default blocks that are hanging out on here. So I don't really need to do that. If I didn't do that, if I did have blocks, what I would ultimately end up with is a layout within a layout. So we can certainly talk about that. But and this is one of the reasons why you have to, if you're going to use panels, you have to make sure that it's right for the client, because if you're going to use panels, you're probably not going to be using blocks or you'll be using blocks, but you're not going to be using the block UI to place blocks. And if you have clients that need to be able to place blocks on the page, then you're having a situation where you might need to allow a client to edit a panel. And that gets really scary very quickly. A lot cleaner to maintain if they know what they're doing, but a lot messier in terms of what they can do wrong to the site and how bad it can get. One of the things I love about Drupal is I hand a site to a client and it's pretty much impossible for them to break it in a way that we can't fix very quickly. Once you give them something with panels in a way in which they're actually able to play with the panels, that's no longer true. All right. So I've moved over to content, and now I can actually move stuff around here. So I can say, well, I want the image to stay in the content area, I want the body to stay in the content area, and I want the links to stay over here. But what I'm missing are the comments. This is an article node, and it has comments, and I want those in this sidebar. So I'll click on the little gear, and then I can choose Add Content. And now I get into this area that starts to show you why you don't want clients using your panels, because this is very confusing. I happen to know, because I've looked around and I've played with this, I know that comment stuff is in the page content category. This looks a lot like vertical tabs. So it's familiar to people who build sites, but not necessarily familiar to a client. So here's the add comment form. I know that I want that. And comments will not be in your page by default, and no, comments are not in comments. Actually, I should show you that, because okay, I made this a little bit too big. Okay, so having trouble because it's too big. All right, so making it smaller again. All right, so Dennis, I'll point to what's in comments in a moment, because that was a little bit confusing at first, and again goes into why you don't want clients playing with your panels, because it's not logical necessarily. It is logical once you really get into it, but you have to have a certain level of knowledge. So this shows you the form that we're about to add, and I can override the title if I want it, thinking about blocks, for example. In blocks you can add titles if you want, so you can actually do that here. Sometimes there will be other options if you have contexts, for example, in your, not the context module again, but contexts in your panels. Then you might be able to pull in content from other nodes or other entities. In this case, the only option we have is this node, so this gives you some options. So we'll save this. So that gives me the comment form. Now, that's not giving me the comments, though. It's just giving me the form. Let's go ahead and preview this, and we can see what that looks like. So we also want the comments. So we'll go in and grab those under Add Content, and we'll go to the Comment tab and see what's there. And what's there, this I don't understand, but it is what's here. So what's here is the add comment form. So when sometimes you say, I want my comments on a different page, I don't want them at the bottom of the node, this is the form that it'll take you to add comments. All the rest of it, all the actual comments, they're all in the comment form that you would have without that kind of whole page concept, are in the page content area. So let's find those. They're there. So we'll find them and we'll add them. We can make modifications to what this looks like, how many there are. This is in the sidebar, so I'm going to limit it to 10. There's only 2 right now. And I'll go ahead and save that. And then I probably want the comment form at the bottom of the comments. And we'll go ahead and save that. So preview. So that looks pretty good layout, and is pretty easy to set up, and pretty nice because it is responsive right out the gate. Well, it's responsive because I'm using a responsive layout. Or if I built a responsive layout, it could be responsive because of that as well. So this is what you get from doing that. So I'm going to pause here for a moment, see if there's any questions or comments. I'm probably not the only one on here who's been using comments. Oh, okay, good question. Doug is asking how the image was floated left. and that's actually a Panoply thing. It's so if we go to the content type, let's head over here to another tab, go to content types, and look at the display settings on here. The image styles, there's these styles that Panoply offers by default, which are image full, image half, image quarter, etc., etc. And these all float by default. And so this is image half right now is the style that it's taking. And this, because I'm using Panoply here just to make this whole demo easier, this is actually also becoming a bit of a talk about Panoply. So you'll see that it's always being half of the space that's available. So no matter how big or small I make it, it'll be half of the space available. It is nice. There are some, so Panoply is actually, it's nice. We've now used it on 2 projects, both of which needed to be built very quickly. And it's a really great install profile for something that needs to be built really quickly. It's not a great install profile, I'll say this right off the bat, it is not a great install profile for something that has to be heavily customized, because there's a lot of stuff that Panoply does by default that gets you really far in a really good direction but might not be right for your custom setup that you're trying to do for a client. And we've actually seen that happen as well, where something needed to be customized to the point at which we were having to undo so much of Panoply that it wasn't worth having the advantages from Panoply in the first part. So Tony's asking, did he miss how this is safer for messy users? And no, you didn't miss that, because it isn't. Panels is not for, anything with panels is not for messy users. Panels is a really dangerous way to go if you have messy users, because it's so easy to break everything. And then Tony's saying, I like panels. I don't, but I'm liking some aspects of panels enough to say that there are definitely times when panels are worth using. And Panoply as well. I actually don't really like Panoply, but I've now had 2 projects where the advantages of getting going with Panoply made something happen quickly enough that we were actually able to do something in budget. And that's what Omega4 used to be good for. And Omega4 is now, it's still in use, but it's now kind of living in that deprecated world because everybody's thinking about Omega4, which is completely different. So to answer your question, and there's actually a lot of, I have the same feeling about workflow versus workbench. There are situations when I love workflow and hate workbench, and there are situations when I love workbench and hate workflow. They do the same thing sometimes, and they do very different things. And there's use cases for each of them. So Panoply, panels, these 2 tools fall into that category as well. They can be really detrimental to your project, or they can be very advantageous when used properly. And and so we're actually making a very good segue into Omega based on the comments and based on what I just said. But before we go there, I did want to show one other thing that is kind of cool with panels. And so I'm actually heading over to one of the panels configuration area, and I went to the wrong one. I do this all the time. So I'm in structure right now, and I want to work on some panel stuff, and I'm going to go to panels. And you'll see that there's these pages that you can manage. You can add new pages. You can edit any of these pages, but you'll see that these pages are a lot of the standard pages that we often have trouble with when we pass a site off to a client, especially the node add edit form. That particular form I've noticed is one that For me, I find it very easy, but I've noticed a lot of clients, sometimes they find it confusing. And so you can actually, with panels, you can actually go in and modify that form and its layout, sorry, not its layout, its content in the way that it uses that layout or its layout. So you can actually kind of move stuff off to the side. Again, this starts to look a lot like Drupal 8. You'll see there's node being edited. There's the node form buttons, the node form author, the node form publishing. There's all these pieces of that form, and you can actually say where those pieces show up in an effort to make this more user-friendly for your client, which can be quite nice. I'm going to edit this and show you what that edit form looks like. I'm just going to zoom out because you know what these pieces look like so that you can see the whole form at once. But rather than all of your publishing options and authoring information being down here at the bottom, it's over here on the right, which can make for a much more friendly user interface. All right, so let's talk about Omega and how that fits into all of this. So Doug said loved Omega4. I did too. Omega4 was a tool unto itself. A lot of people hated it because they thought that it was overkill, which, yes, it is. In some cases, in many cases, it's overkill because it's a very resource-heavy project. It has a lot of UI stuff. It's also, for really, it's, as far as I know, it's the only theme that makes it really easy to get up and running super quickly and have somebody with very low level of knowledge be able to really manage the way that their site looks. And oh, and Kathy's mentioning with panels, she uses the node edit panel to include instructions for nodes that users create, which is great because you can add custom panes in your panel and you can put text in them, you can put whatever you want in them. So that's a great idea. You can really use this to make the instructions more clear, more readable. Kathy, that's a brilliant idea. I'm going to be using that. So, all right, so Omega4, great tool because of the UI stuff that it offered to entry-level users or to anyone who just needed to get a site up and running really quickly because the budget was low or time was limited. Omega4 is not, it doesn't have any of that. It should have a different name. It shouldn't be part of the Omega project as far as I'm concerned because they're two completely different beasts. Omega4 is basically the effort to come up with the perfect base theme, to come up with something better than Zen, something better than Zerb Foundation, something better than Aurora. It's, everybody has a different opinion of what the perfect base theme is going to have in it. And so this Omega4 is its effort as its own take. And I like it. I also haven't used Omega4 that much yet either. I'm still getting used to it. I like it. I think it's a really nice base theme. And as kind of a clean slate base theme for something where you're really customizing everything. So now I need to open up my notes again because I wanted to make sure that I kind of talk about the things that are neat about Omega4. One of the neat things about Omega4 is that it uses layouts. It uses layouts whether or not you're using panels, and the layouts that come with Omega4 are responsive right out the gate. So this kind of layout concept that we were looking at with panels, you can also use that with context, for example. There is actually a module, Context Omega, that allows you to work with layouts and context together. So, so if you're like me and you've kind of lived in the context world instead of the panels world, it's a really cool tool. It also really streamlines the CSS, and I'm going to give you this node, which I'm sure all of you have, but it's worth giving to you anyway, which is just pointing you towards documentation on best practices for CSS. Well, Omega4 tries to kind of start out the gate with really nice, clean CSS. And it also makes it really easy in the UI, in the configuration, for you to enable and disable CSS coming from modules. So I'm just going to show you that really quickly. I'm realizing it's 7:23, and I think this happened to me last time where there was more that I wanted to talk about than the time that I allowed for. So I'm going a little bit quickly, but I think that's okay because this is kind of an overview. So clicking on assets, and so Dennis is asking, Omega4 supports SAS and Compass out of the box. And that is absolutely true, which is also one of the really nice things about Omega. It's SAS Compass right there. You get going, you're all set up. You don't have to, with Omega3, you have to actually go in and manually tell it that it wants to be a SAS project. But in the configuration for Omega, where you can enable layouts and make use of them, I don't have it enabled here because I'm using panels, and you're not going to use the layouts extension if you're using panels. But then there's this assets tab here, and the assets tab allows you to go in and actually exclude stuff from specific modules. So CSS files or JS files from specific modules. So the example on here is views. So I can just type in views. I don't want any CSS coming from the views module. I don't want any CSS coming from the quick tabs module, etc., etc. Really nice way to just quickly get rid of that stuff that you don't want and start with a nice clean slate. So that's a pretty great thing about Omega4. Other nice things about Omega4 are some of these tools that make it pretty easy for you to kind of see stuff while you're developing, and also some of the tools where it tries to kind of help you make your site work in Internet Explorer. I actually have a problem with a site that I did using Zurb Foundation, which doesn't support Internet Explorer 9, or sorry, Internet Explorer 8, and before it supports 9. And unfortunately, as much as we'd like to be living in a world where that doesn't matter, it still does for a lot of people. So it is nice that Omega4 says, okay, we're going to make sure that the theme, the base theme, works nicely with Internet Explorer 8. And then everything else is fairly standard, what you're used to. But you can see how this doesn't have any of the stuff that Omega3 had. This is basic stuff, just making it kind of quick and dirty. Get you going with something super clean, and that's the whole idea here. Super, super clean. It's kind of cleaner than, well, maybe it's not cleaner than Zen, but it's definitely trying to be. So, all right, so point that's being made is that IE8 is still about 28% of the market, and it's going to depend on your client. You definitely want to look at their user statistics. We have some clients for whom Internet Explorer 8 is like 0.02% of their market, and then we have other clients, namely libraries, for whom Internet Explorer is a good 40% of their market. So it's going to depend on your client and the types of people who access their stuff. So Omega4 file system. I'll show you that really quickly. All right, so I'm going to show you this with a theme that's been set up. This is the Lou theme that we're looking at that's behind my Pathfinder window here. Is what we're looking at rather than a fresh base theme. And you'll see that there are a lot of different folders here. The idea is that everything is really sort of compartmentalized so that it's very easy to find. And so everything's in its own folder. It's got its own little place that it lives. You won't, if you're using SAS, you won't ever touch the CSS file. You'll do all your work in the SAS file. And you'll notice that this is also heavily compartmentalized. So you've got your variables folder in there, you have your layouts folder. You don't have that by default, by the way. That's if you create a custom layout. And you have all the components that you create, so you just say, okay, now I need to do some custom CSS for this particular element, you add a new file in here, a new SAS file, and it will actually recognize it, which is great. Your base stuff, so your base typography would go into the typography, so it's all super compartmentalized. Cindy's recommending reading SMACs, reading up on SMACs, and that's definitely a good idea. And then I'm going to show you this file here, loose styles. Now, historically, when we work on themes, hopefully this isn't just me and I'm not, going to just totally embarrass myself, but historically when I worked on themes, I basically put everything into that custom CSS file, custom or local CSS, whatever it was called in that theme. In this case, loo.styles.css sounds like the appropriate candidate. You're like, oh, okay, I'm just going to put all my styles in there. Well, ideally, you don't. Ideally, that file looks like this. Where is that? Oh, it's in there. Okay. It looks like this. It's basically got nothing in it. It's just importing from everywhere else. And you'll see here that we're using wildcards so that it'll pick up anything that you put into those folders. Thank you, Doug, for admitting that you used to do that too. But now we don't have to. Now we can really kind of keep things super clean and make them very easy. In fact, it's not quite documentation within the way that you code, but it kind of is, because your file names and your folders are telling you a lot about what's in there. So the typography, under base typography, you're seeing that this is where all the header stuff is happening, where your link stuff, all this stuff that's just your typography stuff is happening. It's documentation as you go, which is really nice. All right, so that's kind of an overview of some of the things that are awesome about Omega4. Another thing that's really great about Omega4, let's see. Okay, so now I'm in that Panoply demo that I created. I'm in there and I just made that way too big, didn't I? Okay, I'm in there in Terminal. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to enable Omega so that the Omega theme is enabled. And I do want to continue. Let's make that a little bit bigger. Okay, hopefully that's big enough, because if let's see, I want you to be able to see here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so Omega4 is now enabled on the Panoply example site. If we go to Appearance here, we'll see it in the list. There's Omega, it's enabled. So there's also some great Drush integration with Omega, one of the nice things that makes it really great. And so if I want to create a subtheme right now, all I need to do is use Drush and use the command for creating a subtheme, which is Drush Omega Wizard. And I'll just put that in here. And now it's going to ask me what's the name. Call it example. I'll just stay with that because that's oh so creative. I'm going to use Omega as the base theme, not Om, which is a subtheme that comes with Omega. And I'm going to use the starter kit. And I want it in Sites All Themes, so I'm not going to tell it to go anywhere else. And I don't really need the starter kit's README files. And I do want to enable it. And sure, I do want it to be my default theme. And I'm not going to download the libraries now, even though I should, because that'll take time. But that will get you lots of libraries that give you lots of great functionality with Omega. So Kathy's asking, when Omega3 went away, did Omega Tools and the easy way to make a did Omega Tools, the easy way to make a subtheme. So she was very excited to learn about the Omega Wizard Drush option. And I just want to clarify, Omega3 hasn't really gone away. It's still in use And it's still a good thing to use in certain situations. It's just using it is a little bit tricky now because it is not really an active project anymore. And I would love to see somebody, and sadly it won't be me, but in another world maybe it would be. I'd love to see somebody take up the Omega4 project and name it something else and run with it and keep it going, because I think it is a really valuable tool for people. But that's what it is. And, all right, so yes, this is super easy. In fact, this might even be easier than Omega Tools in terms of making a subtheme. So the subtheme has been created, it's been enabled, it is now the default theme. If I reload this, we'll see that instantly. So we're now using Omega, but we're not using Omega, we're using the example subtheme, which was created for me and turned into the default theme. If we do an ls, we'll see example here. If we move into the example directory, we'll see all of the stuff that needs to be there. And Kathy's asking if you need to use Drush 7 to use Omega Wizard. And is it which Drush? I don't remember. No, that's where Drush is. I don't think I'm on Drush 7 here. I think I'm on Drush 5, but I'm not positive about that. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Dennis. Drush status. Yeah, Drush 5.8. So the answer to your question would be no. You don't need to use Drush 7 to use Omega Wizard. And all right, so I'm just going to go into the SAS directory here just to show you that it really, example is my theme name. It just creates everything for you. You don't have to do anything, which is really nice. So now all you have to do is go in and customize your Omega theme. So why why Omega and panels together is also worth taking a quick look at. And what I'm going to show you here, this is a project that uses the Omega theme and it uses panels. And so all of these, every display page on here is using panels. And this is an incredibly low budget kind of quick prototype project that they wanted the prototype to look exactly like the existing sites pretty much. So as you can see, it does. It just has a lot more going on than the existing sites. So Omega was kind of the easy way to quickly make it look just like what they had, but still give them all the added functionality that we were working on in the prototype. And what I was able to do was very easily go in and set up the, I'm going to go under the panels here. So what I want to show you, now I just need to remember what I was going to show you. No, you know what, I'm going to go through. This is why I try to put cheat links for myself to quickly get to stuff, but all right. Okay, so by what I was able to do was to quickly go in and actually set up the panel to use a custom layout that I created. So I was showing you how you could choose the layouts that you want on the other example that we had here, where we were looking at the panels on specific content. So if we go back there, we go to Palms. And by the way, you'll see that the panels layouts are crossing themes. So that's a nice thing as well about panels, is that it is a lot more theme independent than other things that you might want to do. So when you are looking at your layouts, you have all of these options. And notice that now there's these Omega layouts that have also shown up. So Omega has its own layouts that you can make use of when you're actually working with your panels and making choices as to how you want stuff to lay out. And then you can start creating your custom layouts in Omega, so custom Omega layouts, and it'll pick those up as well. So in the Lou demo here, we have custom layout that we added. Let me head over there in Pathfinder. That's right, because I went in there. So I added, an example of over here on the right. Can I make this all bigger? No, I can't. Over here on the right, I have the panels demo project, and this is the sub-theme that we just created. And it's super small right now, but you'll see that the layouts folder is not here. This one on the left, this is the League Easy Web theme, and it has the layouts folder, and it has a custom layout that I created. And that custom layout, if we open this up here, you'll see the difference between the League Easy Web is the Lou.info file. We have the regions for League Easy Web as a whole, which are really the default regions for Omega. We haven't changed that. And then this layout that I created, you'll see that it actually has different regions, including these regions that we set up specifically for League Easy Web for the panel layout that happens inside of a particular node. So the layout that goes into the kind of content area, so to speak, of a node. And Doug asked what was the dotted line that was seen on one of those Omega layouts, this one right here, which is the off-canvas layout, and that's something that you would use. Actually, this is kind of an example of off-canvas, is this menu thing going on here, which, as Cindy's saying, is very good for mobile. So this is kind of an off-canvas type of layout. Sometimes if you, this would also be a good example. I just hid my dock, but if I mouse over here, I bring it back up. That's also kind of an off-canvas concept. Let's see. So Doug is also asking, are those custom regions printed out as a theme variable in the TPL file, or does the theme or panels take care of that? And they aren't in the TPL file itself. They are, actually, you know what? I'm not sure. Does somebody else know the answer to that question? I haven't gone that far yet to need to actually take a look. And I apologize for my dog. But does somebody else on the call know the answer to that question? Okay, so Kathy's saying she believes that custom layouts have custom TPLs. Yeah, that's going to be true. You can create a TPL for your layout. But in terms of your page.tpl file, I think that once you start using layouts, those are going to change. How you're going to work with those is going to change. Again, I haven't gone that far with that part yet. This is all still very new for me because I'm not really a panels person. So that's is that everything that I wanted to kind of cover? We talked about context. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that I really wanted to cover that I thought was interesting about this. I know that there's a lot of other interesting stuff, and Kathy's adding here that the layouts, they have a structure with an include file. So that's what this is right here. I'm going to close these so that you can see this. This is the include file for the layout, for the custom layout that I created, which is Lou Simple. It's just a simple layout. So it has its own TPL file, and it has its own include file, and that include file declares the regions, it declares the style sheets, just like your info file in your theme does. And then you would then use your TPL file to specify how those regions are going to actually be set up. Any other questions? No? Any other opinions?
I am just like you, Rain. I have despised panels my whole Drupal career. And I am now working for a nonprofit that has gone crazy with them.
Right. Right.
But I think Panoply, for the organization that I'm working for.
Thanks so much, Rain. That was awesome.
Yeah, I'm stoked.
That's a lot a lot of information, a lot to work with. I'm really excited to try the Panoply now.
Great. I'm glad you are.
I think this is going to solve some problems for me.
Cindy, you
I
were...
heard that,
oh, sorry.
Cindy was talking. Cindy, you're really quiet.
Oh, sorry. I said I think the organization that I work for now, they're very good on deep training for the content creators. So I think it's something that I need to take a good look at because I think it would work in our situation.
Okay.
But I think,
Yeah.
like I said before, documentation is going to be huge, not only for them, but for me or the developers that come after.
Yeah, just if you're going to have your content creators have access to be able to work with the panels in any way, make sure that your database backups are happening frequently.
Yes.
Because it looks so innocent, but it's so unbelievably easy for a client to just totally hose their site.
Right, right. And actually what they've got now is, and I haven't figured out how it works yet, but they actually do have panel layout choices on a content type. So the content creators can go in and choose different panel layouts at this point. I'm not sure how they've accomplished that, but it looks fairly dangerous to me.
Great. Well, it sounds like a fun project for you, and I would be excited at some point to hear how you come up with a good way to make sure that it's safe for them, or as safe as it can be.
Right. Right.
That would be good information. Right.
if I have to use panels or blocks or something in the panels, if I can, what I try to do is I try to create a note. I use content filling a panel that allows them to edit the content rather than the panel. But say if there's custom information in a block, I'll let there be a block created in the block UI that is, compared to panels, is a lot easier for users to use, and then call the block in the panel, rather than having to go into the panel and edit information and have the ability to change things around. But that's not very dynamic. That's just one block. Or else I'll do the same thing with pulling in nodes. So I try to figure out a way that allows the user to edit either a node or a block, which is on a sort of the basic level, and then figure out a way to bring that content into the panel, rather than having to go straight to the panel to edit the content.
Yeah, that's something I've started doing a lot of as well, as creating little blocks all over the place that are just links to they're links to the edit for that block or for that node. Mm-hmm. and then they're set up contextually to only display for people who have the ability to make those edits. The other thing that I found in here when we were using this is because it was using the panel's layout, you'll notice that the edit tabs are up here, but the content that they would want to edit is over here. And for me, mentally, it was just, I could just picture people not thinking, if they want to edit this, they're not going to think to look all the way over here for an edit tab. So in the panel, I just added this edit this content link, which, you know, can, given more time, I would have styled to look big and fancy, but it's definitely worth taking a little bit of extra time to add little UI helpers for people so that they get in there as little as possible.
And tabs are available in panels. That's something that you can add as an element.
Yeah. Yeah, I could have added these here as well, but I also thought it would be confusing if they were showing up twice. So
yeah,
it's just one of those things, you know, you given the time that you have, you kind of figure out, well, what's the quickest way I can make this somewhat user-friendly. But definitely something to consider.
Well, thank you so much. This is awesome. That was a whole lot of information in a short amount of time. Appreciate you coming back, and of course we're going to ask you back again.
Well, absolutely, it was fun, and thank you. And Kathy, I'm sorry that Fuse, I wasn't able to get Fuse to work, but thank you, David, for opening this up.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay. Well, good night, everybody.
Good night, and thank
Good
you.
night.